What's happening, folks? Right, sorry for the very slight delay. I've been figuring out how to use Instagram Live, essentially. Well, welcome. If anybody's out there, I wouldn't know because I'm not really sure what I'm doing. But thank you very much to Strath for asking me to do this. It's a great honour. And I've been sent some questions and whatnot, so I'll get stuck into them in a second. But I thought maybe it's worth me letting you know who I am to kick things off. I am a former pupil, as you can imagine, hence why I've been asked to do this. I joined Strath back in 1999 in second form, and I was there throughout until I left in 2005. And I suppose lots of the questions that we've got today will, I will share about my time there and how brilliant it was, essentially. And then since then, I left school. I went off to university to become a teacher. I went to Edinburgh University and studied teaching, and became a teacher and worked at Balerno High School in Edinburgh. But that part of the story kind of gets lost because all the while throughout that process, I joined the Royal Marines initially as a reservist when I left school at first. And then ultimately I joined the regular corps and I deployed to Afghanistan in 2011, and that's where ultimately I was wounded in action, blown up by an improvised explosive device, which left me disabled and tore me to pieces. Years of rehab, tens and tens of surgery, probably 30 plus surgeries. But somehow I stumbled out of that into the Invictus Games, discovered cycling, rediscovered sport, and ultimately I went off, competed at the Invictus Games, won some medals, and rediscovered my passion for life, which is basically talking, which is why I'm here. And I'm now, I have the great privilege and honour of working for Channel 4, the BBC, presenting sport, etc. And a few other bits and pieces. I work on programmes like The One Show and BBC Breakfast. But right now, I'm basically an out-of-work TV presenter because there's not a lot of sport happening. So I'm more or less looking after the kids, doing up the garden, hence why you can see some scaffolding in the background, and working in my garage. So thank you very much for giving me something to do for an hour or so. So why don't we just get straight into it? So the very first question I've been asked is, what is your best memory of Strathallan? And that's basically an impossible question to start things off. Ultimately, I went to Strath. My brother and sister were in the years above me. Actually, one of the questions that my sister asked is, she's now considered JJ's sister, whereas I used to be Ruth and David's little brother when I was back at Strath. And so the shoe is on the other foot. But ultimately it's because they went to the school that drew me to it, and I asked my parents if I could go off and join them at boarding school. They were very talented musicians, and they had music scholarships, and I was very, very lucky to get a place basically on their coattails, essentially. I'm sure I wouldn't have got in on my own merits. Ultimately I had an incredible time at Strath. I had amazing friends that are still my best friends to this day. They were the best men at my wedding. We still have our house parties each week at the moment and keep in touch. And you're forever bumping into people, whether it be on a plane on the way back from London or whatever it might be, or on the other side of the world for that matter. One of my friends that I was in Raleigh with, I recently met up with in Hong Kong. It's just an incredible environment to be in. And to be honest, I was academically very, very average, and pretty much average at most things, but I was always up for giving anything a crack. Got stuck into anything, loads of sports, loads of activities, particularly the Marines obviously influenced me massively, and essentially I always strove for excellence, which is what Strath is all about, but knew it was okay to just have a go, and I took great pride in whatever it was, ultimately contributing to the society that I found myself in, whether that was Simpson House, closest to the dining hall, or to Strath in its wider part. And I was very, very proud to do that, and I'm proud to do it still. Question 2 is, if your daughter wanted a career in the military, would you encourage her? That's a great question. If either of my kids, I've got a son and a daughter now, wanted to join the military, I wouldn't say I would encourage them, but at the end of the day, I certainly wouldn't dissuade them. And more importantly, I'm in a very good position, having served in the military myself, to have a brilliant insight into how great it is actually. And so actually, yes, I would encourage them, because I know the massive benefits you can get from it. But my point is, I'm very lucky to understand to some degree, what jobs and roles are available within the military. And so if my kids came to me and asked to join the military, ultimately I would ask what they wanted from it. If they said that they wanted to travel the world, then I'd probably say to them, well, you should probably join the Navy. You're gonna get to see all sorts of countries around the world. If it's that they wanted to gain qualifications and skills, then God forbid, I would tell them probably to join the Air Force, because that is a great place to gain skills which will push you through life. But no matter what part of the military you join, you will gain everything from discipline to teamwork, all the great stuff which Strath prides itself on, but the military does better than anybody really. But if it was combat they wanted, if it was wanting to serve on the front line and experience operations like I did, then ultimately I would push them towards the Royal Marines, because in my opinion, if you're going to go and do a job as dangerous as that, you want to be with the very best. And as I say, in my opinion, the Royal Marines are that. But some may disagree, but they'd be wrong. How did the Invictus Games help you psychologically and socially? That's a really great question, because ultimately, of course, the Invictus Games, being a sports competition, has a physical benefit, but actually so much of it is about the psychological and the social. Because as my good friend David Wiseman, who was injured a couple of years before me, would say, whenever you gain an injury, whether that's being wounded in the battlefield, whether it's a long-term illness, whether it's a car crash, whatever it might be, there will be a physical, a social and a psychological element to your recovery ultimately. And that, whilst the physical part of it is very obvious with Invictus, in many ways the psychological part of it was that challenge, that sense of getting up in the morning and having something to push towards. What in the military we've effectively termed our mission. So that idea that you could wake up in the morning and know exactly what you had to achieve, and you had people there with you to help you achieve it. And that's the social element of it. I wasn't really sure just quite what I'd lost, when I was essentially medically discharged from the Royal Marines, although I wasn't discharged at that point, but my career was clearly on its way out, with the level of disability that I'd been given. And so to be back in that team environment, to have support, to have like-minded individuals around me that had my back, meant so much to me. And as I say, I had that purpose for getting out of bed in the morning, and I had this new drive. Or it wasn't new, I'd rediscovered, what I had before with the military, and what a difference it made to my life, and still makes to my life. I'm very lucky. I now present the coverage for the BBC, and so, I get to have a direct involvement with the games whilst they're on, and also in the process of, selection for the UK team, and the launch of the team and stuff. So, I get to keep one foot in the door in terms of actually being with these brilliant people. But at the end of the day, it's also that a great privilege to shine a spotlight on what an incredible games. So yeah, it has helped me no end, and it continues to help me and thousands of others no end all around the world, for that matter. Why did I choose the Royal Marines? Ultimately, it was because I was a Royal Marine cadet at Strath, and Mr. Walmsley, if any of you remember him, can take a lot of credit for that. As well as the sort of regular training teams that used to come in, Captain Waddle, Bob Turner, A.D. Davies, guys that ultimately I would go on to, serve with in the regular corps, some of them. And, the incredible thing about it was, when you were in school, the Marines was a fairly difficult thing. We had to pass a test to get in and whatnot. Obviously, it didn't quite stack up to what I would go on to experience in the Royal Marines as a career. But it was a great insight into what it was like, and it was great, as I say, within a school context. And even if I'd left school and not joined the Marines, it would have had an impact on my life, and it would have helped me, with discipline and admin and all the other things. And again, some of my closest friends that I'm still in touch with today were guys that I was in the Marines with at school. And ultimately, you know, when I decided to join the Royal Marines, it was because, you know, I'd had this taste of this incredible environment. When I met regular Royal Marines who had at the time just come back from serving in Iraq, it was 2005, so, you know, the first, what we called Operation Telic, wasn't long over. We still had some troops in Afghanistan, although it was much quieter at that time. And, you know, they had these guys that were still exercising all around the world, doing incredible things. And it was this understanding that they had this incredible job, but more importantly, they got to do it with their best friends. And that was the most amazing thing. You know, getting to get up in the morning and do something quite extraordinary with extraordinary people was the greatest privilege. And so, yes, the Royal Marine Cadets at Strath giving me that insight changed my life in absolutely for the better. Disability aside and all that nonsense. If you gave me a time machine and said, don't go back and join the Royal Marines because you're going to end up with a disability, and, you know, I sit here and it's all sunshine and rainbows, but every time I pick my kids up, it's blooming sore. They get heavier and heavier every day. And, you know, I have my struggles, but I don't let them get the best of me because of what the Marines taught me. But ultimately, it was all worth it. I had the most incredible experiences. I have the best friends in the world, and I have a resilience which was ultimately built by the Royal Marines, which you have to live that experience ultimately. And so, yeah, why not other regiments? I in many ways, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, etc., just didn't appeal to me. Yes, I wanted to serve. I wanted to give something back to you know, the wider community. That's what Strath and my parents had instilled in me from a young age. You know, contributing to society, and I thought the Marines would be a great way of doing that. But ultimately, it was in many ways it was the Marines or nothing, and I'm very glad I chose them. What was the selection process like for the Royal Marines? So selection itself, so to even start training, it happened not long after I'd left school. And in fairness, you know, I was 17 years old and I was pretty fit, just because, you know, my knees hadn't packed in yet, my back wasn't sore, and, you know, I was full of hormones and all that good stuff. So, you know, they basically take you away for a weekend and they just thrash you till your eyes bleed, as we would say, chuck you in puddles, and basically make you decide if this is really what you want in life. Yes, there's criteria tests, a certain amount of push-ups, sit-ups, all that kind of nonsense that you need to do. But in selection to begin training and throughout the entire training process, whilst your skills are ramping up and you're learning, you know, everything from how to administer yourself on camp, in the field, to then actually fighting on combat operations, ultimately the thing that they're pushing you to do is to discover within yourself what we call commando spirit. You know, and it comes in different names. The Invictus Games spirit is no different. It is that meaning and purpose, essentially. And it is, you know, people ask me if Royal Marines training was hard, or if it's the hardest thing I've done in my life. And ultimately, yes, it was physically challenging, and it was mentally challenging for that matter. But actually, it was the easiest thing I've done in my life, because I knew I wanted it more than anything. And that was the biggest thing. You know, knowing when the evil demons in my head were speaking to me and saying to me, why are you doing this? You should just quit. You know, I did those calculations in my head and I said, well, actually, I need to pass this, because that's how you get a Green Beret. That's how you become a Royal Marine Commando. And that's what I wanted more than anything. And so, you know, I just strove on and cracked on with it. And ultimately, the worse the experience is, once it's over, those are the best stories. You know, none of my good stories start with, can you remember when the weather was perfect? Can you remember when, you know, everything went to plan? That's just not how life works. Life is much more colourful and far more interesting when ultimately things are not going in your favour, or you're experiencing hardship. Now, it might suck at the time, but after the fact, in the bar, in the mess as we called it, in the military, you know, those are the best stories, and are the ones I still share to these days. And like I say, you know, some of the best times of my life were the worst times of my life. Whether that was being soaked wet through with water dripping down the back of my neck, or finding myself, you know, in the deepest, darkest place in Afghanistan, ultimately being injured. And you know, when I retell the story of getting blown up, yeah, it was never a fun day, but as I say, it was a remarkable thing to get to live through, and at least I've got a good story to tell in a bar. Right, where are we? What one piece of advice would you give to school leavers heading for a career in the military? That's a good question, actually. It's very tricky. I mean, there's so much advice that someone can try and share with you when you join the military, because you can try and give them the path of least resistance, effectively. Give them your insight, your advice, so that their journey is easier. But actually, in some ways, that does them no favors. You've got to learn the hard way. In the military, that's how it works. If you're going to find yourself on operations doing it for real, then you want to have had as many failures and as many victories as possible before you go into that environment. But ultimately, as I said, and I sort of corrected myself when I was asked if I would encourage my kids to do it, is I would encourage people to join the military, because there is so many different skill sets to be learned, so many jobs. Identifying exactly what job it is you want would be the trickiest part of it. But I know you have sort of careers fairs and whatnot, but don't let all the glossy magazines sort of fool you. The best piece of advice is try and find people that have served in the military and ask them exactly what is the difference between a Royal Marine and someone that's in the Air Force, and tell me, there's a lot of difference. So find out exactly what it is you want from it, like I said. But regardless of whether you spend 4 years minimum service, you do an entire career, you join the reserve forces, or even if it's just your time as a cadet in school, I guarantee you will come out better for it. And you will see scary headlines ultimately about things like post-traumatic stress disorder and this sort of broken generation of veterans that we have. And of course there are many people that require all sorts of care after the military, and I'm one of them. But ultimately they sit within the minority, and we're doing a better job to support people like that every day. And mental health, for particularly, and the resources that sit around it is vastly changed since I joined the military. What was that, 15 years ago? But actually, if you look at the pure statistics of it, you will have a better career, you will have more successful businesses. Whatever it is you do after your time in the military, you stand a better chance in life if you have served. And as I say, you should have some good stories to go along with it, and certainly some good friends. As a relatively new father, what's your most favourite kids' TV show and why? Oh, that is a good question. I just got Disney Plus, so I am working my way through the back catalogue at the moment. But the weather's so good that I'm not watching a lot of telly with the kids, obviously. I'm waiting for a rainy day to put on Robin Hood, the Disney one. Can he bloomin' wait? But actually, of all the new programs, and if anyone else out there has seen it, you will definitely agree. Hey Dougie on CBeebies is the best by far. It is pure genius, simple animation, brilliant characters, hilarious shenanigans. Alexander Armstrong narrating it, he's a good lad. And just, it is absolutely brilliant. We listen to the soundtrack pretty much every single day as well. That has got to be my absolute favourite. So highly recommend getting on CBeebies on iPlayer and getting Hey Dougie. Here's why are the Marines referred to as bootnecks? Right, a bit of core history here. So back in the olden days when we were on wooden ships, the Royal Marines, one of their roles on ship was to protect the officers. We used to inhabit the deck that sat between the officers and the sailors, and we would sit outside their cabins at night time as well, because basically we were trying to stop mutinies, the sailors coming and attacking the officers and taking over the boat. And so as a result, what the Royal Marines used to do was take a piece of their boot and they would put it round their neck, so they had leather, and so that meant that the sailors couldn't sneak up on them and try and slit their throats, particularly when they were sleeping. And that's why we wear the high collars on our uniform to this day. And so that's why we call ourselves bootnecks. And then the US Marines stole the terminology and they call themselves leathernecks. But actually the phrase bootneck is so much more as well to this day. Anyone that passes the test and earns a green beret is a Royal Marine, of course, is a Royal Marine Commando. But there's a bit of a difference between that and being a bootneck. A bootneck is a term of endearment. It's a term in some respects that has to be earned. The good lads, we'll all refer to the good lads as bootnecks because they inhabit, they live by the commando values, the commando ethos, the commando spirit that I spoke about earlier. That's what being a bootneck is truly about. As I say, anyone can sort of turn up, follow orders, do a bit of fizz and be a Royal Marine, but there's a difference between that and being a selfless bootneck. And I'm very lucky to have served with and had my life saved by proper bootnecks. How did you prepare for your tour in Afghanistan? So basically, any tour in Afghanistan, we used to do 6-month tours out there. And so you would either get the summer or the winter. And I was on a summer tour, Herrick 14, which was the summer of 2011. So it meant, blooming seagulls are back. I hope that's not ruining the audio. And so it meant that through the winter of 2010-11, we were out practicing. So, I joined my unit. I joined the men that I would ultimately serve in Afghanistan with. We absolutely, upped our skill sets. So we added as many strings to our bows as we could. So half of the guys in our unit were medic. Well, they weren't medics, but they were what we called team medic trained. So it's like advanced level first aid, which basically inhabits trauma. So what happens if you come up against an IED, something that blows your legs off, basically? How do you stem that bleeding? And we just absolutely beasted the skills, and technical ability across the board. Practiced on our weapon systems, practiced on the kit and equipment we would use out there. But the other thing we started to do was just live on top of one another and just get to know one another, because you're putting your life in the hands of the people around you. And so we had a what we called a beat up that lasted about 6 months leading into deploying to Afghanistan in early 2011, and it was tough, and the most ironic thing about it ultimately is it was done in the winter in Scotland. So our final exercise on Salisbury Plain, which I think lasted about 2 weeks or something like that, a couple of weeks before we deployed to Afghanistan, ultimately was done in snow. And that was ridiculous that we were training in the snow knowing that we were about to deploy to 40 degrees heat. That was the process, and it worked. Ultimately I just got unlucky on one day of my job, but we were trained and ready for anything. Right, I've actually got some questions coming in here on someone saying me and the kids love Hey Dougie. So Rachel, good taste, and to your kids. That's DJ B, what a legend. Mr. Barnes, have I seen Gary Tank Commander or Band of Brothers? Tell you what, those are two completely different series, but actually they nail military life. Band of Brothers is by far, hands down, the most accurate portrayal of combat and war that I know. You'd have to ask a Second World War veteran, but from the reports I've heard, they were all approving of what Spielberg and Tom Hanks did with it. But from having lived through similar experiences, obviously nothing to the degree of what those guys saw, but there's always one moment that sticks in my head. It's in episode 2, Carentan it's called. I just watched it last week, and they're storming the village of Carentan, and this lad catches it up in the face, bad artillery, and he can't, one of his eyes is mashed and his face is taking it badly, and I'd see that and I go, oh, that must be horrendous. And then it suddenly occurred to me that that's exactly what happened to me. My face got smashed to pieces, and I'd actually lived through that experience. But yeah, it's incredible. And then Gary Tank Commander at the other end is hilarious. But they've done their military research really well as to what goes on when you're not at war, or you're not preparing for war. The downtime in the military. If you leave soldiers with enough time, you don't give them something to do, they'll find something to do. And Marines are even worse. And so it's the shenanigans that go on behind the lines. That's something. Having been able-bodied, what would you campaign to change in society in the UK? That's really interesting. Yeah, it's been an incredible insight becoming disabled. I grew up ultimately extremely privileged, because I took a lot for granted. I was very physically fit. A Royal Marine Commando has, exceptional levels of fitness. Not to say that I haven't, rediscovered levels of fitness. The Invictus Games will show you that. But it was the freedom to just pull in a pair of trainers and go for a run without even thinking about it. Now I need to get my specially adapted bike out, fold it out. It costs a fortune. And so, there are challenges every day. But ultimately, what does society need to change? It needs to change its level of what we deem as acceptable. Because until you've got friends that are in wheelchairs, for example, you don't appreciate just how inaccessible the world is, and that's just not acceptable as far as I'm concerned. Because that's a big part of society, and you might call it the minority, but it's still human beings, and up to 10% of the population has a disability, and if you throw mental health disabilities in with that, it increases closer to 20% arguably. And so whether that's a physical ramp or quiet spaces, it's the as I say, some of it is little things that we can do, but other things is just saying it is not and of course nowadays it is not acceptable to build buildings that aren't to some degree accessible, but it is amazing what passes for accessible in my experience. And I used to work back when I was at school, funnily enough. I worked in a hotel near where I live, in my holiday job and weekend job, and we had a restaurant, and I worked in a restaurant, and we didn't have a disabled toilet in the restaurant. It was in the health club, which was sort of on the other side of the car park. And I remember thinking, oh, that's fine, they can go across there and use the disabled toilet. And at the end of the day, we don't have anyone in a wheelchair, barely ever comes in. Now, the reason that people in wheelchairs didn't come in is because we didn't have disabled toilets. But more than that, it was the fact that I'm ashamed that that's the way my brain thought. Oh, that's all right, you'll just nip next door. That's completely unacceptable. Everybody deserves a level of quality and a level of access. As I say, and that can be something physical, but it can be, as I say, it can be something which is just the way that we behave in society, all right? And the way we view things, and just taking other people into consideration. And we all need to just do a little bit more of that, and as I say, draw the line. It is, in my eyes, not acceptable that not all the tube stations or train stations in this country are accessible. Like, why should someone with a disability have to get up half an hour earlier in the morning because their commute takes longer? Nonsense. And of course we're improving things, but more should be done, is what I'm saying. They're still coming in. What was your favourite sporting memory at school? What's been your favourite sport event to attend and report on? Oh, great question. So the one thing I was good at school, so I think, I don't know what you call it these days or what you do these days, but it was the charity event, sport charity event. At the end of school, it was a triathlon. You might still do that, but when it first started, it was called the 24-hour run. And it was, there was the Pilgi, if you still do the Pilgi, and it was, you could run that as many times as you could in 24 hours. And then it became the cross-country run. Again, many times you could run it in 24 hours. And then I think it became 12 hours. And I think I won it 3 years in a row. Not least because, not everybody was up for it, but it was right in my skill set, because it was just pure dogged determination. I just wasn't going to stop, ever. And, I think I ran the equivalent of 2 marathons or something like that over the 24-hour period, and I won it in Riley, and then I won it in 3rd form, 4th form, and then I think it changed after that. And yeah, so that was something I enjoyed. But I enjoyed all sports in the sense I would give it a crack. I wasn't in any of the first teams. The peak of my career probably came in the 2nd form A's. As a vice deputy captain, but I always loved it, and I particularly loved I was number 1 supporter, and I always used to go with my mates to particularly I would go to Glenalmond for the rugby match annually. That was off the chart, obviously. And the best thing to report on, Jingo, it's really hard to pick actually. One of the things I love to work on, London Marathon, because it's just pure joy, in the sense that a marathon's not even a thing. It's not It's not like Everest. We know what that is. That's a thing because it's a big mountain. It's the biggest mountain in the world. It's not the North Pole because that's the top of the world. It is a thing because it's an obscure distance that we've decided has gravitas, and people will end themselves to complete it, and then they'll come back and they'll do it dressed as Big Ben. And I get the great job of being in Horse Guards Parade, which is at the end of the mile where they finish each year, and to see people rejoining with their family after they've only been away for 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours, but it's like they've just got out of 6 months in prison. The pure joy and celebration of what they've achieved is just amazing. So I love working on that. But I love the marquee sporting events. The Paralympics, the Commonwealth Games, the Olympics, if they in turn happen. Those are the things that I want to work on more than anything. Still coming in. How has the Invictus Games helped you help the recognition of veterans and serving members that have been injured? Yeah, it's really good. I think the Invictus Games, Prince Harry, with that, has been at the forefront of changing the narrative of veteran support. There are when the first Invictus Games happened, there was a huge need for support, of course, because we were still in combat operations in Afghanistan were just ending. Most of us were just coming out of rehab for the first time, so there was a great majority of us that needed physical support, that needed psychological support, etc. And of course there are people, particularly with the psychological elements, that will continue needing that support, and more will come. But the other thing that it's done, whilst it sort of helped with that hero complex issue, and it did make people aware of the need for support, the other thing that it did is it ended us being victims. Right, I am not a victim. Yeah, maybe I was a victim one day on the 27th of May in 2011, but I woke up from that thing, and I really am not a victim of that war and that conflict anymore. As I say, the Marines, the military, has changed my life in so many positive ways, and so the ability to tell those stories, and that's why I take the great privilege in still presenting the Invictus Games, the ability to tell those positive stories and shine a light on guys that I consider my heroes. People ask where I got my motivation throughout recovery. It's simple. It was Dave Henson on my right. It was David Wiseman on my left. It was Jacko Van Gass, climbing Everest and becoming a world champion cyclist. It was Joe Townsend, the Commonwealth Games medalist. I was surrounded by exceptional guys doing incredible things. And I wanted those stories to be told. And I think that's been the really positive thing that's come out of it. How does your time with the military help you coping with lockdown? Yeah, it's funny. Settling into a routine. There's nothing like routine. Now, it's really important for the kids to have routine, particularly, my kids aren't old enough to go to school. My daughter is at nursery, so isn't anymore. So there is an element of homeschooling going on here, but it's much more going, dig up the garden and see what you discover. And so, yeah, being able to set a routine, have discipline, only drink on the weekends, for example, and set my barriers, and just get busy, but at the same time realize when I'm the busy times, you need to take a break as well. And that's the thing we did. Such a terrible phrase, but work hard, play hard. We worked very, very hard in the military, had a very high tempo, and actually that's what I'm doing during lockdown. I've got more done in the house than I ever have, but actually I've got time to have amazing time with my kids right now, and I've got to appreciate that, because I'm very lucky when lockdown is lifted and sport returns in particular. I'm very lucky to have an extremely busy calendar, and that's a blessing and a curse. Of course I love my job, but it takes me away from my family a lot, and so I am enjoying the time here. But yeah, we used to call it FOB routine, forward operating bases in Afghanistan. It was the routine of living in a checkpoint. There were simple times, living in your little hole in the ground, and it's kind of the same, but don't get me wrong, I've got Wi-Fi, and I've got a sofa, and I've got hot water, and all those other things. So I've experienced hardship. This isn't hardship at the end of the day, but it's not to say that it's easy, and of course people are going to struggle with it, but I'm lucky to have experienced trauma and developed resilience, which will ultimately see me through this. But we are all going to need to get through this together as well, and that's an experience that I've had in my life ultimately. Oh, classic, my iPad's gone off, so I need to get the questions up. This happened to me when I was presenting on the Gold Coast. Oh, I put the wrong code in as well. When I was presenting on a beach in the Gold Coast for the Commonwealth Games, and I did like a bang down the line, absolutely beautiful piece to camera, and then went to move on to the next section, looked down and my iPad had locked out, and I didn't know where we were going, and it was an absolute car crash. Not to mention all the team that were talking to me in my ear, they were back in the UK, so you've got a 6-second delay going to them and a 6-second delay coming back, so you're 12 seconds before someone really bails you out. Neil Armstrong had less of a delay when he landed on the moon, and yeah, that wasn't my proudest TV moment, let's put it that way, if that was one of the questions. Oh well, I've got questions here, but they keep coming in. People are actually watching. Do you keep in touch with Harry and Meghan? Since they've moved to LA, I don't see them as much, obviously. I saw them the 2 or 3 days before lockdown came in. I presented the Endeavour Awards, which is the Endeavour Fund. It's an initiative started by Prince Harry and the other and William and Kate, the Royal Foundation at the time, but championed by Harry and Meghan now, that recognises the incredible endeavours, whether that's the Invictus Games, whether it's Walking with the Wounded, all these great sort of charity organisations and challenges that people in the military and the wounded community and wounded, injured and sick community are doing. So I saw them at that, and ultimately, you know, like me, he's a father now, and he's a busy man. So, you know, like a lot of my friends, I sadly don't get to see them as much anymore. But it was their anniversary, yesterday, I believe. 2 years ago, their wedding, which I was lucky enough to go to. Beautiful weather like this it was. Yeah, that was a bit strange, a bit weird. Yeah, we'll get onto that one. Probably not going to have time for it, but hey. Xander Fagerson, I should say. Oh, terrible. Look at that. That's my commentary. That's my commentary career ended. What an absolute lad he is. Great pleasure to watch Scotland rugby at the moment. So many great Strath players in there. He's just saying thank you. And yeah, looking forward to the return of sport. Cannot wait myself, mate. Cannot wait for the end of the Six Nations. I mean, talk about, I don't get to work on it. I did work on the Rugby World Cup for BBC 5 Live Radio. But it's my dream to get to work on the Six Nations. It is, you know, rugby is just a beautiful sport, beautiful community, and you know, there's so much promise in the Scotland team at the moment, and you know, that France game, Jingzhou, let's see if we can carry that form forward to the other side of lockdown. Yeah, absolutely amazing. So yeah, good to see you watching, mate, and I hope lockdown's going all right, keeping fit, smashing the weights, eating protein, whatever it is you do. All right, back to the questions here. Are all Royal Marines commandos? No, the band service, the Royal Marines Band, the finest military band in the world, are Royal Marines, but they're not commandos. Technically, as a Royal Marine cadet, you are a part of the Royal Marines family, and of course they're not commandos. They don't wear green berets. They wear the beret, same as the band service, which was the original Royal Marines beret. During the Second World War, that's when the commandos were formed, 80 years ago in 1940, and there were Royal Marines that served in the Second World War that were not Royal Marine commandos. Most of the landing craftsmen on D-Day, the British landing craftsmen were Royal Marines, but you know, the commandos were doing a different job. They were landing on the beaches, and they were, you know, they were doing behind enemy lines operations, etc., and they would give birth to, you know, ultimately the commandos would give birth to the SAS, the SBS, and many others. But yeah, so not all are, but all Royal Marines commandos, the reason that we like to commando train all our men is ultimately so that you can serve in 3 Commander Brigade, which is, you know, the wider Royal Marines community, although it's supported by elements of the Army, engineers and artillery mainly. But yeah, everybody wears that green beret. They've earned it, they've earned that standard, and they live by it. Did you ever consider joining the SAS? That's from Claire. If I'd considered the Special Forces, I would have considered the SBS, which is a special boat service, which mainly, particularly at the time, it still does to this day to be fair, but particularly when I was still in the Corps, it recruited from the Royal Marines predominantly. It's like the SAS but a bit wetter, they do stuff in water a lot more. And I would have considered, you know, I did briefings and looked at it, and I have the utmost respect for, you know, the Special Forces community, but ultimately in the Royal Marines it is a specialisation. You know, it's a swimming canoeist specialisation, and you know, yes, it is the pinnacle of soldiering, you know, in terms of, you know, pure-blooded war fighting, But actually, there was other parts of the Marines in terms of specializations that I wanted to do, and I did. I was an assault engineer, and so that is basically an expert in demolitions and mine warfare and frontline engineering support. So, you know, digging trenches and doing all that kind of malarkey by hand, no big diggers and all that sort of stuff. If you need a hole in a wall, it's my job to come along with the explosives and make you a new door. If you need a door knocked off its hinges, that's my job too. Tree line in your way, we can get rid of that for you. You know, so that was, you know, I always say, whilst there is no such thing as an average Marine, I was a pretty average Marine. You know, I was as good as anybody else, you know, and that makes you a very good soldier. But actually, when it came to engineering, that was the thing which I kind of excelled at in life. And, you know, I still do. I'm a tinkerer, I'm a builder. You know, I came top of my assault engineers course at the time. And I'm pretty sure I can still blow stuff up today if you know, without too much. Most of it's still in there. I've forgotten more than I remember, but you need someone blown up, give me a call. So yes, that was the thing which I pursued and looked into within my military career. But don't get me wrong, you know, when I think about the thing which I enjoyed in Afghanistan the most, whilst I did do some great engineering stuff and I held our checkpoint together, you know, I really missed the purity of soldiering. Actually getting down in your belt buckle and doing a job which not everybody can do. And so, you know, there's a part of me that goes, actually, if I'd had it again, it would have been great to do that. But, you know, it ain't easy to get in, obviously, but the other thing is the lifestyle that comes with it. It's relentless. You know, our special forces are on operations. Not that many parts of our military aren't deployed around the world right now anyway, and of course they're, you know, taking on the battle against COVID-19, but, you know, the special forces are, you know, they are run ragged at the moment, and that's a very tricky thing. You know, if you've got a family. Obviously I didn't have a family at the time, but, you know, I appreciate now just the level of sacrifice that those guys give. Are you spotted out and about like a celebrity now you've been on the TV? That's hilarious. It doesn't happen that much, but hilariously. So it happened a couple of years ago. It was the very first time it happened, and I was hungover, terrible. Don't drink responsibly. And we just stopped at a motorway service station. It was after a stag do. And I was going in to get a cup of coffee, and this guy went, "You're that bloke off the telly?" And I thought it was hilarious. The bloke I was with thought it was hilarious, and he said, "This must happen to you all the time." And I said, "No, it's the very first time." That is very funny. But no, I don't get that recognised. I'm not that famous, you know. But I like my anonymity. We'll see. What was your nickname in the Royal Marines? I was pretty lucky in the sense, because you can get a bad nickname, you know, you'll never get rid of it. But, you know, I'm JJ. Funnily enough, when I was at school, obviously I was called JJ, but I always thought a day would come when I would have to be a grown-up and actually call myself John or John James. But we had a teacher at school, Mr. McCann at the time, and his name was JJ. And I thought, well, if he can get away with being called JJ, then maybe I can. And then you join the Marines, and everyone needs a nickname, so I kind of had it. And then Telly, it works in Telly as well. It's a show business name. Having said that, we used to joke that we would one day write our books, and so we'd need pen names. So we all made up pen names for each other, and the lads called me Barry Cheddars. So yeah, Barry Cheddars. And if you ever see a book written by Barry Cheddars, you know it's actually me. Yeah. And I still proudly call myself Barry Cheddars. I used to have it on a plaque above my rifle in Afghanistan. All our kit was lined out. Mine there, Barry Cheddars. What's scarier, live TV or the Strathallan speech day? Brilliant. Yeah, I mean, the funny thing about doing something like the Strathallan speech day, which I did 10 years after I'd left school, so that's 5 years ago now, and it was a great privilege to get to do it. You know, following the likes of Chris Akabusi and Ronnie Corbett, and some guy that made signs for a living, I believe, if I remember correctly. And I always loved speech day, you know, jam tarts, get dressed up in your Royal Marines uniform. But, you know, there's people in that room that you know, particularly Miss McFarlane, who is the reason that I can talk nonsense for 45 minutes. And, you know, when there's actual human beings in front of you, it's brilliant. Because live telly is very strange, just staring down the barrel of the lens and talking nonsense. It's nice to have human feedback. But the reason I love live telly is because it can all go wrong at any moment. That's why it's so great. And most of the work I do is live. There are different skills required for doing live versus pre-recorded work. So it's not to say that one is easier than the other, but I think in my opinion, live telly is more challenging, and that's why I like doing it, because it can go wrong at any moment. That's why I like the Marines. It was the unknown. I Jingdo was the same when I was at university, sadly leaving all my stuff to the last minute for hand-in dates. It's because I need that pressure. I need my back against the wall so I can fight my way out, which is it's a strength as much as a weakness as well, funnily enough. But yeah, that's why I love doing live telly. But it's also the fact that you've got this incredible team of people looking after you. Now, whether that's in Afghanistan when you're kicking a door in and you don't know what's on the other side of it, knowing that you've got this an unbelievable recovery process that will put you back together, like it did for me, and that's the same in telly terms. Obviously, my example from the Commonwealth Games was there was that big delay, so the airbag didn't quite go off, but someone will always come to your rescue, and it's knowing that you've got these people to look after you and support you. So yeah, what was trickier, I don't know. But yeah, all I'll say is that getting to do speech day was an absolute privilege, and something that I never expected would happen. You got to know, as I said at the beginning, I was a fairly average bloke at school. I don't think many people that were in my year at school would have thought it would be little old JJ Chalmers that would get to these dizzy heights. What's Prince Harry like? Funny. I always say he's like a captain in the army. When I first met him, that's how I treated him. And it's still how I treat him to this day. The only sort of real difference is that his life's changed a lot, and so's mine. We're both fathers now, so we kind of just chat families and boring stuff like that. We're usually at something when we see each other, so we're usually kind of caught in the moment of Invictus or whatever it might be. But ultimately, he is nicer than, if you think he's a good bloke, he's even better, is what I would say. And, I cannot stress how much the Invictus Games changed my life, therefore how much he changed my life. And if I was a prince, listen, I wouldn't, I'd be using my powers for many other things. But, he chooses to do it to change the lives of people. And I'm very lucky that I'm just one of the people whose lives he's changed. But there are thousands of people like me, and not just from the military, from communities, whether it's his work in Africa, HIV/AIDS, all sorts of stuff. He's a remarkable person, and he will forever have my respect. And what are the plans for the Invictus Games going forward? So we should have literally on Saturday just gone past. We should have finished the Invictus Games 2020 in The Hague. But unfortunately and obviously they've been postponed. We're still looking for dates for it, but they will happen next year. Fingers crossed. That's me crossing my fingers if you're wondering. And then moving forward, it's a 2-year game cycle. So Dusseldorf 2022, and then so on and into the future. And so that's the future of the games themselves, which is great. And then the Invictus Games Foundation, which is kind of like the governing body of the Invictus Games, is continuing to span into other great areas. So we've already had the Invictus Games Choir, which was formed in 2016 by Gareth Malone, and they've just released a single with John Bon Jovi. And there's Invictus Games Racing in motorsport. It takes on the British GT circuit, and they're doing a lot of sort of online stuff at the moment as well, e-racing and stuff, which is great. And so it could really span into a whole bunch of different things. Literally just announced 2 days ago, there's a great event called the Superhero Series, Superhero Triathlon. If you looked at it, you'd think it's a disability sporting event, but it's not actually. What it is a mass participation event for everyone. And so it doesn't matter, what your disability, what your ailment, what your anything in life is, you are welcome at this place. And we will find a way for you to be able to do a triathlon. If you can't swim, we'll tow you in a dinghy. If you need to ride a tandem, you ride a tandem. If you need a recumbent trike like me, you ride that. If there's nothing wrong with you, then you can help somebody else. So they are now partnering this year with the Invictus Games. They've had a great partnership with the Endeavour Fund, but now the Invictus Games, to do at-home superheroes. So it's going to be on Channel 4 in August, and we're going to be doing challenges at home. I'm going to be captaining a team of Invictus Games athletes, former ones I should hope, because I hope they're in, you know, the physical shape that I am rather than a serving member. And so yeah, we're going to do some sort of great challenge at home, and it will be superhero, but it will also be Invictus Games. So you know, there's a great future for it, and hopefully it's going to go do some amazing things. But keep your eyes peeled for that one in particular. It is just pure joy, that event, and you know, at the heart of the superhero series. And the Invictus Games, you know, it is about sport for all. It's about adaptation. It's about community, family, and those things are just going to marry perfectly with one another. Right, I'm probably running late now, but I've still got a few questions, so I'll try and get them done before my son wakes up. So we'll try and just get some of these knocked off, and you know, maybe we'll call it quits at 1 o'clock. I don't know if you guys need to get to lessons or something like that, or Neighbours is on. I can't remember what time Neighbours is on, but I hope you all still watch it. When it moved to Channel 5, you know, I kind of went out of it, but we used to set our clocks by it at school. So we've already had some of these, which is great. Did I think of joining the SAS? What was my nickname? When am I next on telly? Well, sport's cancelled right now, so I don't know is the answer, other than at that Channel 4 event, as I mentioned. I believe it's August 18th, I think. Claire Balding's presenting, and as I say, I'll be popping up on it. I'm still doing some remote stuff. I did some pieces. I did a piece for BBC Breakfast the other day. Still doing some one-show stuff from a distance. I'm just about to start recording a very different series for BBC Two, actually. I can't say too much about it, but it involves me gutting my garage and turning it into a workshop. So I'm just about to start doing that, and we'll start recording that over the summer, and you'll see that next year. And then when sport returns, I hope to return as well. You know, ultimately the Olympics and the Paralympics is you know, that's the biggest bucket list, and you know, I'm devastated that it's not happening this year, but you know, there are far bigger things at play than an epoxy sporting competition, even if it is the biggest in the world. You know, we've got to do the right thing, the sensible thing, and hopefully once we've got through this together, we'll be able to enjoy that beacon of light at the end of it, and I hope to be there, essentially. So yeah, try not to get myself fired in the next year. Who's your favourite presenter to work with? That's a great question. I am very lucky to have worked with the best in the business from a very early part of my career. I mean, it's ridiculous, really. You know, my two first gigs that I really did, or three first things I did when I think about it, was the Invictus Games in 2016, which I presented with Gabby Logan. Then the Rio Paralympics in 2016, which I presented with Sophie Morgan, who is a kind of novice like me. But you know, we were working with the likes of Claire Balding, Jonathan Edwards, the guy that got me into telly in the first place, Ewan Thomas, other great names. And then I presented a series for Remembrance back in 2016 with Sophie Rayworth, the News at 10 reader, Chelsea Flower Show, VE Day, etc. So you know, getting to work with people of that caliber is exceptional. You know, surround yourself with greatness, and you know, and try and take yourself to their level. That's a lesson in life. So I'm very lucky to have seen them. But you know, who's my favourite to work with? Alex Jones, who presents the One Show, and we present Invictus together, is just a riot. She's hilarious. She is, you know, she's got that spark that you just can't be taught. She's just lovely. You know, there's a lot of people. Dan Snow, the history guy, you know, worked with him on, you know, VE Day, etc., and D-Day commemorations. He's a top bloke. Yeah, no, there's some really, really, really nice people out there. I don't know who is hands down my favourite, but there's some great characters, and I've missed your name off the list, you know, and those are sort of the big obvious names. And then there's blokes like Radzi that used to present Blue Peter, and now we do lots of sport work together. You know, you couldn't ask for a nicer bloke to work with. So, you know, I'm very, very lucky to go to work with people that I respect, and you know, people that have become my friends. I seem to have cracked some sort of friendship with Chris Hoy. I mean, how ridiculous is that? You know, and now we actually work together, and I would call him my friend. He probably doesn't know who I am, but you know, it's hilarious. It's hilarious. And don't for one second think that I believe this is happening. It's all nonsense. I'm still the same idiot that went to Strath 16 years ago. But you know, I'm just saying yes and getting on with it. Right, I've got to. Sounds like my kids are coming, so I'm gonna have to call it quits, I guess. my wife's saying, have I got suntan lotion on? And I do. But I chose to be outside, but I am absolutely getting pelted by it. So tell you what, one last thing, because actually we pretty well covered it all. Who was my favourite teacher at Strath? I would love to do that, but it wouldn't be fair. But I would say, very, very quickly, I've said Miss McFarlane already, I've said Mr. Walmsley, those were people that influenced particular parts of my life. Mr. Barnes has cropped up in here, and he's a man that I look up to still to this day, the manner in which he, carries himself. But I'm very lucky to have returned to Strath. I used to teach the Marines. I even taught cricket at one point and became friends with people like Mr. Proctor and PK and and had some really good times in the Master's Common Room, and became friends with some exceptional teachers. But the biggest influence was my housemaster, Mr. Kilpatrick. Not to say that I needed a father figure in life, because I've got an exceptional family and my dad's a legend, but he was like a father to us, and that man, I absolutely love him, and he, he's responsible for a lot. He created this monster, shall we say. And he got me an A in English somehow, and I'm dyslexic hence why I can talk but can't write. So my very last one is, if you had one piece of advice for a Strath pupil unsure of what they want to do next, what would it be? That is very difficult, because I'm a font of all knowledge and I could go on forever, but I must go and make sure the kids are all right. But meaning and purpose, that's what you need in life. I ain't no expert, so you can take this advice or not, but meaning and purpose means more than anything. And listen, I've banged 3 careers down range so far. I was a teacher, I was a Marine, and now I'm a TV presenter, and I've loved every single one of them, and each one of them has filled me with meaning and purpose. Now, we can try and attain lots of things in life, fame, fortune, but I've met many people who have travelled down the fame road and it ain't cut out to be what it is. And I know lots of people that left the Marines and went on that well-trodden path into the city in London to make big bucks, and they left shortly thereafter, because it's what gets you out of bed in the morning. It is what it is what you want to do in life, the meaning and purpose, what defines you, that makes the biggest difference. And that's the thing. You will not. I'm very lucky to have stumbled into it early in my life, and 3 times, and some people never find it. You might not find it straight away. You might not know what to do at university. You might not want to go to university, and you don't need to, but you need to move forward. You need to continue to add strings to your bows and improve as a person and strive for excellence at all times. But ultimately, the thing which will make you most happy in life, whatever that is, you will find yourself one day doing something. If you've fallen into a career, into a job, whatever it might be, and you suddenly realise, I'm not going to work right now. This doesn't feel like work. This is everything I get up for. And once you've found that thing, whatever it is, right, and it doesn't need to be big and shiny, it just needs to make you happy, put a roof over your head, of course. If you find that thing, you'll never work a day in your life, and that's beautiful. But as I say, you will be filled with something that money can't buy you, that fame can't give you. Like it is, and as I say, it is best summed up as meaning and purpose. And as I say, you might not find it straight away, so you've got to keep working, you've got to keep striving forward, and be patient, right? We all want to change the world. We want to change the world tomorrow, but it doesn't happen like that sometimes. The thing that the Marines taught me is you've got to, if you want, I believe we used to say, if you want to soar with the eagles, you've got to cluck with the turkeys, right? You've got to earn your time. You've got to do your time at the bottom, basically. Any tradesman will tell you that. Any apprentice, any person that's done their time at the bottom and is, gone through the hard yards to find out, whether they really want to do something or not. And that's essentially, what you need to do. Go out there, give things a crack. If you love them, keep doing that thing, right? And you'll go to bed a happy man, and you'll wake up with something to go, with something to attain for. So anyway, I'm running out of time. 51 seconds remaining. Do you know what? My wife wants me back in the house, but there's a part of me that's a TV presenter, and I do live telly, so I want to speak right up to the last second. So this is what we call filling. So I know I've got 40 seconds, someone would be talking in my ear saying, yeah, 35 seconds to end the program, and they'd probably start counting just about now, or certainly giving me 30 seconds, and I would say, well, what a great day it's been. Jessica Ennis, wasn't she fantastic? Oh, what a great victory for Eliud Kipchoge there, or whatever it might be. You do a bit of that nonsense, you say some of those things, and then you say thank you very much for watching, guys. It has been an absolute pleasure and privilege, and I hope my rant has been well received and other people will watch it, and my